we're going to get into this. To me, is probably one of my favorite lectures, which I probably say every time, but this is a special one in my opinion. It's called The Evolving Ethos, and it is a truly interdisciplinary thinking model, a teaching picture that we can use to organize our thoughts as to how do these multiple disciplines of knowledge or fields of knowledge connect to each other. And as I develop what's going to be on this model, you'll see that each field of knowledge is an institution in our society. So in a very real sense, this model is showing the interdisciplinary connectivity between the different institutions that govern our world. And that to me is extremely interesting, because I think it's by understanding how everything connects and influences each other that we can understand how the world has evolved from the past into the present, and of course, probably more importantly, from the present, how will we evolve from the present into the future? It's our decisions, it's our choices that are going to create the world of tomorrow along two different tracks that I'm going to show you. As a matter of fact, I'll throw this out to you right now because I think it's an interesting point. So just let this marinate in the background, okay? So there was a Harvard professor. He wrote a book called Standing on the Sun. I should have brought it to show you. I have it in the other room, and it was very fascinating. A very fascinating book, and what he basically said was society evolves and moves forward along two tracks. So imagine in your mind that society is a train, and there's two tracks, okay, that the train of society is moving toward the future upon. What are the two tracks? And I'll throw it out to you. You see how this will connect later, okay? The two tracks are technology and rules. Technology and rules. You might literally say that it's the hardware of society, the technology. What are the tools and the technologies we use to make the world work and make it better? And the software. What are the programs that are operating inside of the computers or inside of the technology? What is the software? What's the culture, right? There was a guy named Jesse Thornton, an author named Jesse Thornton. He wrote a book called Science and Social Change. I think it was 1933. I quoted him in one of the papers I wrote, and a lot of his thinking is formed the basis of this model. And he had said that essentially there's two minds that create the world, for better or worse, okay? There's two minds that create the world. You know which two? Think of the different professions. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, all these different types. Who do you think of the two brains that create the world? And I'm not trying to say it should be that way. It is. I'm just saying it is that way. What are the two brains? Jesse Thornton said, the lawyer and the engineer. The lawyer and the engineer. Why did he say that? Because the engineer creates technology, the hardware of society. The lawyer creates the rules, the software of society. Okay? Now that's very interesting, because what should the software be given what the hardware is? When we discovered fire, we needed to figure out, if you put the fire too close to the hut burns down. Well, we need rules around fire. When we discovered, we go all the way forward to now, where we've got the internet and social media, and it's like, whoa, we have this new technology, this new fire that can either heat up the world or burn it down. It's like, what should the rules be? This is the point of this lecture, is to try to understand what is the interdisciplinary connection between all of the different factors that become technology and rules that make the world what it is. And as a leader, as a decision maker, you're getting your MBA, you're getting your master's degree, you're getting your undergrad degree, depending on who's watching the video. Maybe you're not getting a degree at all, but you're still responsible to create in the world. It's like we got to understand how things connect. So here we go. I want to start this whole model, the evolving ethos, with the law itself. That's my discipline. I'm a lawyer. That's my ultimate background. I have to be honest with you. I really kind of see this whole thing at 50,000 feet. And we can go very deep and very nuanced in different areas, and we're going to go beyond, honestly, what I know. I have to be honest, And my purpose is not necessarily to show every intricate detail of the connection. It's to show the overview so that we can explore the infinite detail inside the connection. I'd like to learn too, and I want to see you guys learn. I want to see that light bulb pop up in your face as you connect things. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to see that you guys have those connections in your mind. All right, so where does the law come from? How does it get developed over time? And you read that paper for this week that I wrote, Law is the Ethics of Yesterday, Ethics is the Law of Tomorrow. And so the question, of course, is, well, what does that mean? Ethics is the law of tomorrow. Law is the ethics of yesterday. Ethics is the law of tomorrow. What does that mean? Well, it means that there's a set of ideals, there's a set of values that we want to live by. And in the previous video on the ivory tower and the business battle, we talked about some of those, various different types of values that matter. Whether that's telling the truth, being transparent, whether that's life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, whether that's the good, the true, the beautiful, whether that's about, caring or love or friendship or whatever the ideals are, we want to basically do no harm or minimize the harm that we do in the world and establish well-being. So you could say broadly that, ethics is about, harm reduction. How do we reduce harms, right? And the advancement of well-being. I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to see this, but the advancement of well-being. Right? So we want to advance well-being. We want to reduce harm. This is the essence of ethics. How should we live? We should live in a way where we can benefit each other and not harm each other. And then the question becomes, well, how do we do that? And so we make laws and rules to do that. So the idea, though, is this, that the law doesn't necessarily change proactively. It's usually a reaction to social change. Okay? So we say, hey, you know what? 80s, 90s, people of same-sex background, they don't have the same marriage rights under the law. We shouldn't have that. Why does it matter? People should be able to love whoever they want and to have the same protections under the law, under the tax code, etc. And so we have a social conversation about right and wrong. We have this conversation about ethics, and then slowly but surely the legislatures catch on to it, the courts catch on to it, and the society shifts. And it's and then boom, the law changes with it, right? So ethics changes the law over time. Law usually is a reaction to an ethical pressure or the pressure of society. Okay? But there's another side to this whole coin, okay? As you see in the paper that I wrote, Law is the Ethics of Yesterday, Ethics is the Law of Tomorrow. If you look at that final paragraph, you'll see that throughout the paper, there's other factors that affect the evolution of law. And eventually I talk about what's going to go here in the middle, the evolving ethos. I'll put it there in a second. What's this side, right? So this is our ideals and our sort of ethical values. Well, what's this side? Okay. Well, this is our economic interests, right? This is what we need to do to survive, right? What are the economic interests we have? And I think this is very interesting because the law is really seeking to balance out the two natures of human beings. We have a financial nature, a sort of outer world, and then we have sort of a love nature, an inner world. And the law tends to seek to balance that. What's a great example? Well, hang on, let me back up a second. Part of what I'm trying to say on the economic side is, while we might want to advance ethics, there are certain economic interests that push back, sometimes for good, sometimes not for good, right? So through lobbying, companies can push on the legal system to make the law benefit them, which may or may not benefit people. An interesting example might be something like, should GMO foods be labeled? Well, you would think that, yeah, they should all be labeled, right? But I'm not going to blame anybody, but certain companies said, you know what, we don't really know if the law should require labels, because that could make it so we don't sell as much food and make as much money. So we want to lobby against a labeling law or lobby against, things that would, make it hard for us to advance our product. And so therefore the law should be more balanced on our side of the equation. Does this make sense? Okay. There's lobbying interests that are going to push for them, push for their products and what have you, okay? Sometimes for good, sometimes not so for good, depending on how you look at it. But the law is seeking to balance both. I'll give you an example of how the law seeks to balance both. So in the Americans with Disabilities Act, the law basically says, look, you have to provide a reasonable accommodation to someone who's disabled. So you got to put in, ramps or what have you, so that people, maybe someone's in a wheelchair, they can get in the building, or make it possible for them to sit at their desk comfortably. That's a reasonable accommodation. Why? Why do we have to give a reasonable accommodation? Right? Why does that law exist? Well, because it would be unfair, unreasonable, unethical, unkind, to discriminate against someone who wants to work, but they can't because technically they can't get to the job. That's not fair. That's not the culture we want to be. Ethics is about how should we live. What kind of culture do we want to be? Well, we want to be a culture where everybody has an opportunity to work if they want to, and people that are disabled should be given a reasonable accommodation so they can work. So the law is, you got to give them a reasonable accommodation. That's the ethics side. But look at the other side, and I think this is a wise move in the legal system, okay? You cannot impose an undue burden on a company so that they actually could go out of business or suffer serious economic harm just to hire someone, okay? So let's say you have someone in a wheelchair and, or whatever's going on, there's a disability, and to make it possible for them to work, maybe to work in a warehouse operating equipment or something, you have to retrofit the equipment, and it's going to cost, $500,000 per machine, or $500,000 total to retrofit the equipment, and the company as a whole only makes a, $400,000 profit. I'm making this up, okay? It would cost more money to provide a reasonable accommodation than the company even makes. So it would be an undue burden on the company to hire these particular people because it wouldn't be a reasonable accommodation. It would be an undue burden. And so the law is balancing. Look, yeah, we should give people jobs. We should create opportunities. But we can't do something that's going to destroy the company so that the company has no jobs, because that's going to eliminate the job. It's a little bit, again, like that ivory tower business battle. We have to balance out the two sides, and that's what the law is trying to do. And I think that's fascinating. I think that's a great aspect of our culture, that we try to balance out the values of ethics and the needs of economics, and it can be a very healthy thing. Now, as I said in that paper that I wrote about ethics and law, law is the ethics of yesterday, ethics is the law of tomorrow, I talked about that there's something that is ultimately responsible for how the law evolves, and it's the evolving ethos. What is ethos? Ethos is essentially the belief system of a culture or society. It's the character, attitude, or beliefs of a person or culture, right? It's what we think is right and wrong. It's what we think how the world should work. It's the customs, in a sense, the customs of the culture. So the customs influence the law, the customs influence the ethics, the customs influence the economics. But new ideas, new experiences, ethics influences customs. New technologies, economics influences customs. And so as a whole, the ethos evolves, the evolving ethos. The ethos evolves over time. And that evolving ethos is what becomes the rules. All right? Now, remember I said technology and rules? Let's look at something else. Watch. Something goes down here. Okay, so we have law up here, ethics, economics. What goes down here? What word goes in that on this line down here? What is the discipline? What is the institution that goes here? And I will give you a hint. This is what the entire structure rests upon. All culture rests upon this. This is the thing that distinguishes one culture from another in a great degree, particularly the difference between ancient cultures and modern cultures. And this, to some degree, third world countries, cultures from first world cultures. What goes here? What is it that goes here? Think about that for a second. Okay? Well, what if I were to say, there goes my cap, what if I were to say that what goes here is science? Science, right? Let me get my cap here. Sorry. Science. What do you mean? Well, look, science And I want to define that a little bit more broadly than the scientific method, because science is always evolving. But I mean, in general, the knowledge, the knowledge base of the culture. You know, it could be that we think, well, diseases come from evil spirits. Well, you're going to have a certain kind of culture, a certain kind of ethos, a certain set of rules for that culture based on that science. And then you discover, whoa, germs are... disease is not created by evil spirits, it's created by germs, and that kind of shifts the whole possibility of that culture. What are the possibilities for that culture? You know, oh, well, we didn't discover agriculture, or we discovered agriculture, but we don't know about irrigation, so there's only a certain amount of food. Well, then we discover irrigation. It's like it opens up this whole thing. So in this way, I'm just trying to kind of paint a picture that science kind of really underlies culture in a very, very substantial way, right? Because it creates sort of the groundwork for culture, which leads us to a deeper point, right? So I'm hoping you're staying with me so far. There's an influence that science has on ethics, and there's an influence that science has on economics. And I'm actually going to draw upon Aristotle to make this distinction. When I kind of came up with this whole model, it was about 2008. I wrote that other paper in 2006, 2007. And in 2008, I started thinking, like, there's more to what I'm trying to say about how law and ethics connect and how law and economics connects. And then I kind of discovered that, whoa, science is the key to it. And I was just thinking it through, and these words came to me, and I did some research, and it turns out Aristotle defined it this way. And here's what Aristotle said. There's two branches of science. You might consider, let me tell you what he said. He said that there's techne, okay, which is basically the applied science, right? And then there's episteme, or sort of the pure science. Science meaning what we know, like our knowledge of the universe. So what word is rooted in techne, right? So you see that, technology. And what word is rooted in episteme? Some of you may know this, some of you may not. It's a philosophical word, epistemology, which is basically the branch of philosophy that's concerned with what can we know? Like, what can we understand? How do we discover things? So in a sense, you could say science has a pure side and science has an applied side. On the applied side, we develop new technologies. So it's like, okay, whoa, and I'll just build an example here real quick, right? We have this new technology. Well, what is it? Well, we figured out, that we can grow a certain amount of food, but there's pests, and they eat all the freaking corn. They eat all the lettuce. They eat everything. So we discover pesticides. Good idea. Yeah, new technology, that opens up vast new economic horizons. We can create a lot more food. We can feed a lot more people. We can make a lot more money. And there's no reason to regulate it. Why should we regulate something that's a great idea? You don't need to, okay? Except for one problem, is that on this side, okay, we find out 20 or 30 years later that, these pesticides actually cause cancer or could cause cancer, as an example. And then it's like, well, if ethics is about harm reduction or harm or creating well-being, well, it's not really a good idea to use the pesticides to create more food once we learn that people are getting hurt. So we kind of need to regulate it. But, how do we regulate it? And that's how the epistemological side of science works. Science quantifies harms, okay? So if water is being, let's say we have new ways of distributing water, or we have, let's use that as an example, and there's a certain amount of contamination that's getting into the water. Well, but how much contamination is reasonable and fair to maintain well-being and reduce harm, and also make sure that that we have water and that there's money being made? Like, how do we balance it, right? And so science will look at the quantification of harms, and then the law will, in theory, and hopefully, listen to the science, and the law, the rules will evolve. I mean, you could even see this in the cigarette cases back in the 80s when, kind of everybody kind of knew, well, smoking's probably bad, but it's maybe not proven yet that there's anything really wrong going on here. And it's a huge industry, a lot of jobs at stake. And then little by little, we kind of find out, well, no, it's really addictive and it causes cancer. And it turns out they're lying about it, which came out in the court cases. and therefore we need to really fundamentally shift the liability here, as another example. I mean, you could do a ton of different examples showing how science creates a new technology which maybe needs regulation, maybe needs certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Where we're basically using the tax code to incentivize it. It might need certain. It's right there on the tip of my head. I'm sorry, at the moment it's not coming to me. But the idea is that, let's say we want to do green energy, right? So green energy seems like a good idea, but it needs incentives from the legal side. So we create the tax law to incentivize this, and this seems like a great idea. And then 50, 60 years later, we think, well, but wait a second, like the green energy, as we're learning, there's a lot of new information on the internet now about whether or not, the use of windmills is actually as environmentally positive as we think, or the use of electric cars, what do you do with the batteries, etc. There maybe needs to be certain regulations on these industries as we learn their impact on society over time. And so in the aggregate, I hope I've made sense here, in the aggregate, this model shows how society is evolving over time. Our beliefs about right and wrong are evolving over time. Our potentials and opportunities economically are evolving over time based on the evolution of our scientific understanding. The law should respond to that. And so I'll leave it there for this week. I think we can go a lot deeper. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you one more thing. Let me give you one more thing. And I'm almost nervous to do it in the climate we're in now, but I got to do what I got to do to teach you. So there's another surrounding aspect to this, right? I would call this the core model, the core idea. But beyond this, okay, there's another realm. And I will just simply say this. What other driving force is behind the evolution of law, right? What's actually making the law come into being? And, well, you can just call it like it is. It's politics, right? So politics influences how the law evolves over time. And what influences politics? Well, it's interesting because science also influences this category, this discipline. And I'll give you a hint, how do we learn things? How do we transmit knowledge between each other, right? It used to be the oral tradition. We just told each other stuff, and then we figured out writing, and then we figured out radio, and then we figured out TV, and then we figured out the internet. So the state of science evolves this, and this, in theory, is supposed to keep this in check or can advance this, what goes here. You're probably saying it in your head, right? Media. Right? There's a certain amount, well, let me just leave it there. Media is the communication of knowledge, right? And so politics and media go together. And then what kind of controls this outer loop of politics and media? Well, I would say that there's a strong argument that money has a big influence, obviously, on these two realms. And if you have the money, you have the power, right? And so money and power in the surrounding, okay? Money and power influence the functionality of this inner model, okay? That, I think, is very interesting, and we can kind of take this concept into class, and maybe I'll do another video in the future to go deeper. But this is the evolving ethos. This is how our society evolves over time through the interaction of these different fields of knowledge and the institutions that house them. All right, I hope you learned something. I'm looking forward to talking to you. See you soon.